talk show you've never heard of. It is Backroom Politics Live from Shelley's Backroom, 1331 F Street, in the heart of our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Joining me as they do every Tuesday to my left, he is the former floor chief for then Minority Leader, Congressman Gerald R. Ford. He is the former Vice President of Government Affairs for the National Broadcasting Corporation. He is Bob Hines. Hello, Bob.
Good afternoon, Justin.
And to my 11 o'clock, she is the former General Counsel to the Homeland Security Committee under Benny Thompson. She is Obama appointee and your area neighborhood commissioner up in Capitol Hill. She is Denise Krapp. Hello, Denise.
Hey, Justin.
And to my 12 o'clock, he is the retired one-star admiral from your United States Navy. He is Admiral Ken Carradine. Hello, Admiral.
Hey, Justin.
And to my 1 o'clock, he is the bar-certified attorney in the great state of Maryland and the District of Columbia, former Democrat, or current Democratic political operative, Dan Lipner, Esquire. Hello, Daniel.
Hello, Justin.
And to my right, he is the former Undersecretary of Commerce who served under, last count, 4 presidents, longtime Senate staffer, longtime Washington insider, and a very handsome and distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center. He is the Honorable Alan Moore. Hello, Alan.
Hello, Justin.
Well, it's been a lot of news going on here in America. It's been a really rough week for the United States. For those who don't know, it started with a tragic event that happened, the death of a young man in a parking lot in Baton Rouge, Louisiana last week, where 2 members of the Baton Rouge Police Department used deadly force on a young black male, causing his death. 24 hours later, there was the very disturbing video that came out of Minneapolis, Minnesota area, where the death of a young black male during a traffic stop at the hands of a police officer up in that area was caught on Facebook, and the Facebook live feed went viral. That began a series of protests, which included last Thursday a very peaceful protest that started off in downtown Dallas. As the protest concluded, a sniper, an assassin with a modified assault-style rifle and a few handguns on him, decided to target police officers, in which then started off a 3.5-hour standoff with Dallas Police Department. That subject was killed, and as it all turned out, there were 11 police officers injured, 5 police officers assassinated, murdered in cold blood, what was largely a police protest. In an unrelated incident yesterday, 2 police officers were shot in St. Joseph's, Michigan, at the courthouse outside the Backroom County Courthouse. Unrelated to a police targeting, it was just an assailant who got access to a firearm who was in court that day and shot 2 sheriff's deputies from the Backroom County Sheriff's Office. But that has sparked a huge, huge discussion in America. The nation right now is in conflict. There is an apparent division inside this country that is being either hyped up or promulgated, however you want to call it. But there is an obvious division inside this country based on race, based on law enforcement's use of force and the law enforcement presence in the community. It is a disturbing situation. We're going to focus on that here in Backroom Politics. First, our hearts and our thoughts and our prayers go out to all of those who suffered a loss, both the victims of the shootings at the hands of police in Louisiana and in Minnesota, and our hearts and prayers go out to the 5 fallen police officers in Dallas as well as the 2 in Michigan. It is a tough situation. President Barack Obama today attended, along with President George W. Bush and Vice President Joe Biden and their spouses, attended a memorial service in Dallas, where yet again, after a tragic mass shooting, the president has to be the consoler in chief. Let's start with what's going on. Let's start off with what happened last week. Dan Lipner, we've seen the videos of both the Baton Rouge shooting and the Minneapolis shooting, which started off the number of protests that happened across the country. It sparked a continued dialogue and now a heightened dialogue of the use of force by police. Is this a huge problem right now?
The answer is yes, but it also depends on who you talk to. So since the events of those two shootings and in addition of the assassinations in Dallas, and I will deliberately call them assassinations in Dallas, I've engaged in lots of conversations, and unfortunately they've split down predictable divides. People who say that if you're talking about the Black Lives Matter and the two gentlemen who were killed by police during the standoffs, one of which was a traffic stop that led to those gentlemen's deaths. If you speak in terms of the Black Lives Matter, and I'm constantly using the refrain that Black Lives Matter, there's an unwritten T-O-O, that belongs at the end of that statement. That somehow means you don't support police. Then the flip side of that conversation is to support police means that you apparently can't acknowledge that there are problems in policing in the United States, and there are problems in policing that unfortunately break down on racial lines. The New York Times just published an article talking about a study that was done, talking about the use of various different tactics on minorities versus white folks. Ironically, in this case, the study did reveal that there is no racial breakdown on deadly force, but on the use of other kinds of force, there is a distinct difference. But the inability for the larger conversation, and smart, intelligent, engaged people have found a way, for the most part, of engaging the conversation, but the larger populace seems to just be wanting to break down on very hard lines, not wanting to see the other side. And I've personally been struggling on a way of bridging that gap to have that conversation. And it is a hard battle to fight. And the battle to fight isn't the police or people who are victims of unwarranted attacks. The issue is simply the ability to have the conversation and understand the other side.
But Alan Moore, when we look at this dialogue that's supposedly be happening, and then we hear Barack Obama, the President of the United States, talk about the fact that America's not in crisis. This is a dialogue that should be ongoing, but the perception that America has a crisis going right now is just not accurate. Do you buy into that?
I don't have a quarrel with the president's words. I mean, America has had and continues to have a major problem when it comes to race. When you see a sequence of events, not just in the last week, but in the last couple of years, where thanks to the existence of cell phones and in some cases now body cameras that police have, and we have visual images, which is something that heretofore has not been a regular part of this kind of dialogue, and we watch with horror as people are gunned down. Sometimes, there's usually some kind of an explanation that some folks find persuasive, others find completely bogus and unpersuasive. I think the ability to see images is contributing to an elevation of the issue, not to crisis proportions. Although, if you were from Dallas, you'd say it's a crisis. We just had 5 police killed, 6 shot, a few civilians shot. I welcome more and more conversation, I fear, I think Dan did a good job summing up that how you see things depends on where you start from, where you sit. And the only way you can bridge this divide of African Americans feeling like they're profiled, targeted, treated differently, treated unfairly, and there's an enormous evidence that that is in fact the case. It's hard to say, oh, they mean well, they don't, the intent is pure, they need to be educated. That's not how they see it, and that's not how I see it, frankly. On the other hand, there are plenty of white Americans who say African Americans to some extent need to understand they bring these problems onto themselves. I don't buy that. What is necessary, and Dan talks about this too, is a willingness to see it from the other person's perspective, not just to see it from the African American perspective, although I think that's the key here, but to see it from the white perspective too, where people say, wait a sec, don't just smear all police, don't smear all whites. There's a disconnect, and maybe if something good can come out of the increased visuals of these horrors, it is that with the encouragement of the president and other political leaders, local, national, local, starting with the Dallas police chief, with the surgeon who was in the operating rooms in Dallas, who was a remarkable African-American guy who made a lot of sense. There's no easy solution here, but we have to start by understanding, it seems to me, especially as a white person, what it's like to be an African-American in the United States, where you really do, you and your family and your children, especially males, but females too, are treated differently and negatively. We have to accept that and say, wow, but what do we do?
But Admiral Ken, a black man growing up in the South, who's experienced interactions with police as an African American male, we hear this as a black versus blue situation. We've heard that term a lot over the past 96 hours. But what we don't hear is the Hispanic community. We don't hear about Hispanic Lives Matter. We don't hear about Asian Lives Matter. We don't hear about others that are sometimes focused or picked out. And a lot of the times, if you look at the video, for example, in Minnesota, one of the responding officers after the shooting, there are several black officers. Is this in fact a black and blue issue? Is it a community and blue issue? And is it fair not to include the entire community?
So, like Dan, I spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people this weekend about this, as the information about what happened in Louisiana, in Minnesota, and Dallas evolved. And I found myself struggling to figure out what I was going to say when you asked me a question like this today. I think there are a couple of things going on. One, the metrics that Dan spoke to, in addition to the ones that were published by the Washington Post, bear out the fact that in the case of police using deadly force, at least for this year, the numbers don't show that there is a higher level of incidence of deadly force against black people or people of color in general. I want to say 512 people to date, maybe 513.